Before we begin, in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we live, work, and play on the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, the Stoney Nakoda Nations, the Métis Nation, Region 3, and all people who make their home in the Treaty 7 region of southern Alberta. This acknowledgement was brought to you by CalgaryFoundation.org. Now, back to the podcast. We should go for ice cream, and we'll order it in a waffle cone, but then ask them to put the ice cream in a bowl.
Can you fucking imagine? Can you fucking imagine the one guy who has to watch that happen?
You'll watch. I'll order it in a bowl, and then I'll eat it, and I'll make him watch as I eat the cardboard bowl right in front of him.
He has to wait.
That wasn't what I was imagining.
I will consume the. Listen, I will consume any domicile that is used to contain ice cream, and no one can stop me.
Just can you imagine some poor Dairy Queen worker who serves Gabe being like, oh yeah, he's just gonna, I hope he enjoys his day or whatever. Like, dude,
Dairy Queen.
I don't. Look, listen.
Marble slab.
Just okay. Well, fucking whatever. He just gets his ice cream, and the guy just like, have a good day, and then he just watches Gabe slowly lower his spoon down into his throat. And then slowly devour the cardboard cup that thing came in.
Why would you make the rest of us picture this, Dean?
I'll be like that Sync Burger King commercial. You know the one.
I imagine not slowly. I imagine Gabe unhinges his jaw like a viper and sticks the whole thing inside at once and swallows.
It'll be exactly
or it's like the Cookie Monster where he just shoves it into his face.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. Hey there.
Bonjour.
My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. Just go to fucking therapy.
If I develop Sims, delete the channel.
We need to start a revolution.
And you know what? I'm gonna say it.
All of them are fucking idiots.
25 is technically you.
Just say your morning routine.
And that's fucking it. Excuse me? Where my Grisha's at? Yo.
I'd like you to rephrase that, Sam.
Is my guilty boner. Like, you'll attract the kind of people that are into serial killers. That's still bigger than a city.
It's more than one planet.
Percy Jackson is Greek mythology fanfiction.
Boneless. Oh my god.
No. Hello, everybody. My name is Dean, and welcome back to the InkGuild Podcast. Tonight, I have Alex.
Hello.
Gabe.
Hello.
Marie-Soleil.
Hey there.
Tyler.
Hello.
And a new friend of ours joining the channel and the season, Lee.
Hello.
So, with our thing, I guess with a new friend joining us, she will be participating in a few episodes this season, and we can't wait for those conversations. However, I guess as is tradition on the channel, let's first get to know Lee a little bit. So, as we've done before, Lee, we've been talking, like a lot of us when we're first introduced in these, we kind of just talk about ourselves as creative writers. However, a lot of us are more than just writers. Obviously, we do a lot of creative things. So let's talk about your creative origins. So when you first started doing creative writing, and I think where you kind of are now with it.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm really excited to be here. Second of all, you could say for character creation, my family has played D&D for a long time, so I started like character creation pretty young. But the first time I sat down and decided I was going to write something was probably in grade 5, because I was really, really mad that the book series I was reading wasn't like publishing fast enough. So I decided to well, if they're not going to publish it fast enough, I'm going to write my own gosh darn story kind of situation. And I have carried on with it on and off ever since.
Nice. I love that approach.
There was some rage writing involved.
Yeah, just fuck everything. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do this myself.
You can't end a book on a cliffhanger, man. It's just rude.
It is, yeah. That sucks. What was the book? Just out of interest.
Have you ever read anything by R.A. Salvatore?
No.
Yeah, okay. So R.A. Salvatore, because my family is composed of nerds, is one of the main writers in the D&D Forgotten Realms saga, and it was one of the like Legacy of the Drow books that I was reading. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I'm a bit unfamiliar with like D&D lore, so it's kind of unfamiliar to me, but I'm sure that there are people, there are people who are listening, and I guess within our group that probably know. So, but yeah, it's good that that kind of creativity, I guess, started somewhere, especially somewhere so young, because a lot of us, for us, it started out really young, or like us wanting to be creative writers started out really young too. Creative people in general, I think. So, over the years, you've had time to kind of develop that. So let's touch on that. So, how is it? So since that first memory, have you kind of been doing more with like character creation and story writing and all that?
Okay. So first of all, I like to think I've gotten better, because I've gone back and read some of my first writings, and oh boy. So I like to think I've gotten better. Not quite sure. I like to think that. So what I'm doing right now is I do run 3 homebrew D&D campaigns, which I know technically don't, sometimes people count them towards creative writing, sometimes people don't. I count them toward a loose collaborative creative writing. And then on top of that, I am writing in the Mythic Cosmos setting, which Tyler and I believe Marie-Soleil are also writing in as kind of like a collective project. And I'm also working on my own almost sci-fi series. It's difficult to explain, and I'm kind of embarrassed now that I'm on the air, but essentially the idea is, I was reading a Marvel comic one day, and I was like, the idea of their super soldiers aren't super soldiers in that universe, they're just people with a lot of power. So if you had someone with superpowers who is trained as an actual soldier, how would that look? Essentially.
Ooh.
And that's the premise of it. My issue is with my creative writing is I want to write short stories real bad, but they always get away from me.
As in, they kind of get a little bit too long, or?
Yes, they grow legs and develop more plot than I wanted them to. Is generally what happens.
Yeah, I feel that. I think coming from me as a novelist, or someone who wants to be a novelist, it's difficult kind of nailing down short stories, because especially stuff like postcard stories, which I wasn't really familiar with until I did university personally. And this is just kind of a side tangent, but basically just when you're used to developing narratives, and when you have more fun telling longer stories, trying to write stories under 5,000 words, and in the case of postcard stories under 500 words, it's hard. So I guess as one challenge, what are some of the challenges that you've had as a as a amateur creative writer?
One of the things that challenges me a lot, and anyone who's read any of my text messages and or any of my first drafts, is I have terrible spelling. I have truly horrendous brain vomit spelling, and so I'm good at getting words on paper. I can sit down and pump out a fair-sized amount of work, but to go back and make it coherent and make it make sense is where I struggle sometimes, because I do have dyslexia and I do have ADHD. So sometimes going back and editing my shenanigans is painful for everyone involved. Another thing that I struggle with and I'm trying to move away from is I'm very narrative. When I write, I'm very focused on my narrator, and my narrator slips in where it shouldn't. So I'm trying to develop more character voice.
I think on that too. So I obviously cannot speak for dyslexia because I do not have it. However, I can speak for narrators, which I think is a pretty nice tangent to go on while I guess the conversation is still fairly young in the night. So Yeah, let's talk about that. So I also struggle, I think, with narrators coming in, especially when I'm writing in the third person, which I'm doing for my books. It's really, really hard. Actually, like, it's a lot harder when you're in the third person, which I don't know if you write in, but basically just it's difficult when you not only have to account for, moving the plot along, but, characterization, like how characters behave, how they talk to each other. Like, is that something that you kind of reflect into, like, with that kind of struggle?
With my narrators, I do reflect with that. But my issue with narrators is my narrators slip in where they shouldn't. Because you know how you can kind of, in third person, you can kind of slip in between because you're talking about a character and then they have dialogue and then they have thoughts and then you're talking about a character again.
Right.
Sometimes my narrator slips into places where a narrator really shouldn't be. And it makes the reading clunky. I don't know if I'm describing this like correctly, but my narrator bleeds.
Because I understand like the narrator bleeding thing. Yeah, I get that, but just like for people who might need a clarification.
So I'm writing a piece, and it's ridiculous because I'm basing it off the Iliad. And if you've read the Iliad, the narrator in the Iliad is completely third person, completely like omniscient, and talks about their characters, and the narrator is telling the story themselves because it's supposed to be a recited poem.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of borrowed that voice for the narration of the story that I'm writing. However, in the Iliad, dialogue's very clunky because it's like, oh, Achilles said on to Patroclus X, Y, Z, and then Patroclus said on to Achilles. If you're going through certain translations, it can be very clunky. And the one I read and internalized was very clunky. So now every once in a while when I go to write dialogue, I almost, if I don't catch it and I don't look for it, I fall into that same clunky style where instead of Mersha saying, hey, this is ridiculous, why are you doing this? I will like say, and then Mersha, blah, 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 even though it doesn't make sense with how the rest of the scene is going to flip into narration quite as heavily.
Right.
Because
okay.
Narrators kind of phase in and phase out depending on how you need them to set scenes, at least in the piece that I'm using. And my narrator just likes to Kool-Aid man its way into everything.
Okay, yeah, I think I kind of get a better understanding of that now. Yeah, that's happened to me a lot, I think. Thanks
Narrators
for clarifying.
are tough, man.
Yeah, it's hard. Like you want to help explain something, but then you're kind of like, am I explaining too much? I don't want to give everything away. Or it's like, here's a scene. Let me talk a little bit about it. Wait, am I showing a little bit? Like, am I showing the right amount where it's not like too explainery? But
yeah,
I digress on that. I think just a couple final questions here before we move into the main topic of tonight. You had mentioned before I was listening in and just found that you had mentioned D&D comics, specifically Marvel. I think a few other influences that I think kind of helped guide you along to being just a very nerdy person. I think is that a good way of saying it? Or
that is a very apt descriptor. I am a very large nerd.
Yeah. So how much would you say that these things kind of influence your work?
I will admit this. I will froth at the mouth for comics, either for joy or sheer unadulterated rage. So comics and how they build characters and how characters morph and fit different timelines, different universes, different worlds, even different eras of their consumption is something that hugely creates how I think about a character in context. Because Deadpool from the 90s isn't Deadpool from the 2000s, isn't Deadpool now.
Mm-hmm.
Because it has to change to fit different worlds, different universes. D&D has created a lot about how and specifically DMing, has influenced a lot of how I world build and how I have characters react to the world.
Right.
Because something I hate is characters in a vacuum, which I think tends to happen if you don't have a base for the background. And D&D is something that's really, if you're DMing, or even if you're just a player that really likes role play, is something that makes you take a character out of a void. Because you can sit down and have a brain baby and your character's sitting there fully formed, but then what relationships does it have, what type of bonds does it have, and how does it interact with the world is something you kind of have to figure out. And depending on your character, that could either be a large part of their story or a small part of their story. But like, you kind of got to figure it out regardless.
Mm-hmm. Were there other kind of big influences that you can kind of just like list off, aside from like comics and D&D?
I read a lot, and just a lot of reading. My family is composed of one sci-fi nerd and one fantasy nerd decided to get together and have kids. So the fantasy genre and explicit and really cringy 80s sci-fi is something that I read a lot, and I think it's reflected in lots of my writing.
All right. Cool. I guess then, just as a final question and as a good like introduction for our audience to how you are, we have stated our writing goals before on the channel, all 5 of us, just to kind of like, because most of the people who are listening are following along on our journey, and we would like to know what your goal is as a creative writer / creative person.
I want to finish the 2 long form stories that I'm writing within the year. That is my overarching goal. I'm not sure, like, if somehow I post them on the internet and people start reading them, great. But I kind of just want to finish them and give them a coherent story that is well polished.
Mm-hmm. And is that sounds like a short-term goal, if I am speaking correctly. That sounds like something you want to get done like within the next 5 years or something?
Yeah, most definitely. I would like to finish them within the year. Long term, I'm not sure. I would love to have something published, but we'll see. It's not something I'm completely married to.
All right.
If it happens, it would be amazing. If it doesn't, I'm not going to cry over it.
All right. Guess we'll see then indeed. So that was Lee, everyone. Applause.
Lovely to meet everyone.
Woo! Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Lee, why are you here? When the fuck did you get here?
You opened the door and I slithered in like the insidious person I am.
God damn it. Did none of my like little Lee traps catch you on the way in? Shit.
No, you didn't have good enough tea and or comic books. So, sorry, man. Try better next time.
I need a bigger bear trap.
Oh, I love friend banter. It's always great. Love that.
Friends? Wait, what? You got that assumption?
We're blood enemies.
Well,
of course.
All right. Okay. Sorry. Apologies.
Yeah, Dean, get your facts straight. Jesus.
How could you not get the blood feud vibes from us? Come on.
I don't know. Just when I imagine blood feud, it really needs to be visual for me. But anyway, I guess we're kind of getting distracted. So that was Lee, and I think then we can now move into tonight's main topic. So for those who have seen the title, obviously, we are going to be talking about favorite characters, which we have done in season 1 already. So Alex, Gabe, and I have already done 2 episodes on favorite characters. I think Gabe and I have probably done a separate episode on video game protagonists. However, we haven't done a follow-up to our favorite characters since season 1. And I think like, I don't remember who pitched it, but I think we all just kind of unanimously agreed that, yeah, we should probably follow up on it because it's fun talking about cool characters. Some of the characters that we had talked about before in previous podcast episodes have been Hannibal Lecter, specifically Mads Mikkelsen's Hannibal. There was Kratos from God of War, King Bradley from Fullmetal Alchemist, just all of those you can check out in previous episodes, as well as the video game protagonist episode if you're more into video games. However, let's follow up. Before we kind of get into it tonight, though, I just want to give a few ground rules. So for everyone, for us 6, they already know this because I've explained it, but for everyone listening, we'll each take roughly 5 to 10 minutes going over a pair of case studies. So we'll be sure to take turns. I'll speak first, Alex will go second, Gabe third, Marie-Soleil fourth, Tyler fifth, and then Lee sixth. Once we kind of finish off our first round of picks, we'll go again. So the episode will hopefully clock in at around 2.5 hours. Timestamps will be in the description in case you want to listen to one in particular. However, I think, and following the discussion, we'll have honorable mentions at the end. I guess because naturally there are a lot of characters that we have not taught, or that we had to sort through, because when we talk about favorite characters, it's not exclusive to books or it's not exclusive to books or one specific medium. It is across movies, books, TV shows, video games, anime, whatever kind of story I think is out there nowadays. So I think with all of the build up kind of finished, let's get into it. So I will start off by talking about a character that, God, I just love. It's Yennefer from The Witcher. I think specifically Anya Shalatra's Yennefer from the Witcher Netflix series, because she is the one I'm most familiar with. Full disclosure, I haven't finished the Witcher games. I haven't finished The Witcher 3, which I know Yennefer features prominently in. But I know that just watching the depiction of Yennefer in the show, me being more familiar with that character means that I, especially nowadays, know a lot about her. And I love and adore Yennefer in that show. Just kind of the surface level things. Anya Shalatra is a perfect fit for Yennefer. She portrays that character so well. Just the person that Yennefer is in the show is a wonderful fit, and Anya Shalatra again does a great job. The costuming, the kind of aura that Yennefer has, just whenever Yennefer is on screen, she just makes me really happy, and just the relationships that she has with Geralt and with all of the other characters, she is amazing. She is powerful, and I think that's what I kind of want to get into with this, because a lot of Yennefer's story kind of building up to, and I guess spoilers for The Witcher, kind of building up to the moment where she, I don't know, I don't remember offhand what the specific name is, but where she kind of changes herself, gets rid of the I don't want to say the condition because that's vague, but just the fact that she is hunched over and her spine is all contorted. Just when she changes that and becomes more normal looking, her entire life at that point had been suffering. She had gone through a lot, and just having basically experiencing powerlessness in a very literal and figurative way portrayed through her was great to watch. Again, more praise to Anya Shalatra because she did such a good job of that. But I think once she did have the power, and all of the attention from everybody, I think then the show and Yennefer as a character kind of explored one of my favorite parts of characters gaining power is what do they do with it and how do they live with it. What is it? I think in episode 4 there had been a significant time skip, or a pretty notable time skip, in where she has her seat in court, but instead of being the great mage that she thought she was going to be, she had been I don't know if I'm quoting verbatim, but just cleaning up a bunch of Aedern's political messes and stuff. And throughout that entire episode, I think episode 4, which is a personal favorite, she just understands a lot more, I think, about her place in the world, and just how still, despite having just a little bit more access to power, there is still a powerlessness that she can't avoid. Aside from that, just little bits about her. I love that she is very, I don't want to say aggressive, but like she really feels powerful through her raising of her voice, through her, like, I think at one point she had one of the first things that she did to Eastrid was like slap the shit out of him, which is funny. Just commanding the attention of a room whenever she walks in, and just an all eyes on her kind of thing is so cool to see. Like the show, like Netflix did such a good job with like portraying Yennefer as like this incredibly powerful character who, like, after being somewhat restrained for a good portion of the season, finally watching her unleash hell and chaos in the final battle of the first season of The Witcher was so nice. It's such a nice payoff to see this powerful character finally have the power that she wants and just go balls to the wall, amazing with it. So, yeah, that is my first character, Yennefer of Vengerberg. I know Tyler's familiar with I know Tyler's familiar with Yennefer across not just the show but the games and the books, so I'll have him elaborate for a little bit.
All right. Because if you like how powerful she is in the show, I'm going to say you're going to like her in the books a lot more. I started reading the books and playing the games and only recently binged the entire show. And I'll be entirely honest, though Yennefer is one of my favorite characters in the books and in the games, the show makes her seem really whiny to me. And they really, in my opinion, really dumbed down her character to very basic motivations as compared to what I saw in the books. And I do agree with the portrayal. The portrayal is wonderful. Her power and all that, top notch. Actress, perfect. But I will say that they really went away from the source material for the Witcher show. The main character of the Witcher books is the Witcher, Geralt of Rivia, and then to half extent, Cirilla. Yennefer doesn't get her own chapters, not until later. And she is seen as a love interest, though an interesting love interest, and side character. She still has a commanding power, but I found that in trying to make her a main character in the show, they took away a lot of the mystique, interest, and almost I would give a term of eldritch nature behind Yennefer's power and how she operates within the world. And I do have a problem with the whole Aretuza situation in the Witcher show, mainly because, as I believe I've spoken before, if you're going to, film adapt something, you should film adapt it word for word. And I realize that's my personal opinion and not shared by everyone. And as such, they expanded Yennefer's story massively, which is all right. I just wish they would have stuck with the source material more, because I think it would have made Yennefer a lot stronger of a character. Personal opinion.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because you're right. Like, I really do adore Yennefer's power. So I think, me not being familiar with the books at all, I would love to see how the original source material kind of portrays that power. Because, like, as powerful as she is now, like, just the level of like thing, I think it's because of that mystique that you had mentioned, Tyler, of like she doesn't always appear. She doesn't have her own chapters, I think, until later on, like you said. Just that definitely adds to thing that definitely adds to the mystique. It's what makes like some like movie monsters and villains in general intimidating. You don't really see them until either the very end or completely. That just makes the fear of the unknown scarier.
And there's one note I want to say about that final battle in the Witcher series, the Battle of Sodden Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Once again, they really wanted to make Yennefer a main character, and I applaud them for doing so. I definitely think she deserves to be a main character. But in doing so, I am very worried they have given her main character syndrome, because not to spoil any of the books, but she is about on par with the level of most high sorceresses in terms of power. She doesn't have any special blood or special sorceress material that makes her different from any of the others. She got the same training by the same people. She's just a badass about it.
Mm-hmm.
And I know in the show they've given her, there's that something special, that certain je ne sais quoi that exists within her. And
yeah,
again, not my favorite trope.
Yeah, to be fair, they really are running with the whole quarter elven thing, which, like, I haven't really been able to ignore since rewatching the show. But, I mean, I acknowledge it. Like, it is still something that, like, it is still, like, a pretty familiar trope, but still fun to watch for me personally. It's very great to watch just...
The magic portrayals were phenomenal. I will say that.
Yeah.
And even if I disagree with Yennefer's OP power level in the show, the actual, like, they match similar descriptions of the magic that occurs in the book.
Mm-hmm.
And they follow the same styles of magic in the same magical system that The Witcher has, which is a soft system, but they still stick to the core rules of it to some extent, which is, of course, at least something nice from the books making its way in.
I think to kind of close off my point, when season 2 drops, we should do a Witcher episode. Fun.
Yeah, fun.
Do it.
There'll be split perspectives.
That's going to be a very long episode. Long episode.
It's the Shadow. It's like basically Shadow and Bone, just almost 3 hours of completely unmitigated chaos. Anyway,
Speaking of Shadow and Bone.
Speaking of Shadow and Bone, Alex.
What a perfect transition there, Dean. Did you practice that one?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, so the first character I want to talk about is Nikolai Lantsov from the Grishaverse series. So Nikolai is first introduced in the second book in the original trilogy, which is Siege and Storm, and then becomes a very important character for like the last 2 books in the trilogy. Makes a special guest appearance in Crooked Kingdom, and then has an entire duology focused on him, which is King of Scars and Rule of Wolves, which I finished yesterday. And he's been my favorite character since the first time I read Siege and Storm, like years ago. He's extremely charismatic and charming. He's one of those people that like knows what he's good at and is good at it, and isn't afraid to like use his talents to his advantage. Like he's incredibly charming. He's incredibly smart. Incredibly lucky, honestly. And I think a lot of the original Grisha trilogy, I think, is very dark and heavy, and a lot of it is also a slog to get through. And I feel like Nikolai was, in his introduction, was a good positive balance to a lot of like the darker stuff going on in the cast. And I thought, and I mean, he's just like one of my favorite character tropes for sure. Like the charming swashbuckler type.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I thought he added a lot to the cast to make it feel less like dragging down, I suppose. Like Alina and Mal are not having a good time in Siege and Storm. There's like a lot of like really like bad stuff happening because war. Not exactly a positive time, and I just thought Nikolai balanced out the cast really well, like I said, and he's just a really fun character. And then I don't want to go into too much details about what happens later in the books because I know Dean doesn't want spoilers. But
I said you're clear to. If you want to, then you're fine. Like, I don't want
I can be
to be spoiled. Yeah, I don't want everything to be spoiled, but like. What?
There's some big stuff though.
You were already pretty vague though, because when you texted me when you finished Rule of Wolves and quote unquote you were losing your fucking mind.
I was losing my fucking mind. That had nothing to do with the Nikolai stuff. That had to do with all the other characters.
Oh, okay. All right.
But in Ruin and Rising, there's like a really big thing that happens to Nikolai that I don't want to mention outright because that's like a big spoiler. But it's like when that happened, I remember being in shock. Leigh Bardugo is not afraid to put her characters through some shit, honestly. That's all I'll say about it.
Just gonna start flashing up as many traumatized characters as Leigh Bardugo's put through.
Yeah, and then like I always found his relationship with Alina very interesting as well. And like the way both of them kind of found each other like drawn to each other out of like this duty, out of this desire to like protect the people they care about and protect their country. And I thought like he was an interesting love interest to add to Alina's collection. It's not enough to be just a love triangle, right? But I thought he was like an interesting character, and he offered very different like perspectives besides Mal, who like fills the childhood best friend role, and the Darkling, who I really hate calling a love interest, but he's technically a love interest, who kind of fills the broody dark boy, brings out the worst in the protagonist kind of role. Because with Nikolai, he's very much the I can give you what you need in order to succeed, and you don't have to like sacrifice your goodness in order to achieve it, basically. So he was an interesting alternative, and I always thought their relationship was really, really interesting. And then having read King of Scars and Rule of Wolves, and like the things he goes through in those books and the decisions he makes, and being able to like actually see into his head instead of like seeing it from an outside perspective was really interesting. And seeing like the way he thinks about things and the way he navigates the world was just a real delight. I am so glad that those books exist. And they're honestly very good. But yeah, it's the right, I think his existence lets Leigh Bardugo write in like very clever ways. And like just to like play around with the way he thinks about things. There's a lot of times where you think you know what's happening, just like based on the way things are written. Like you have all these facts laid out for them that lead you to come to one conclusion, and then it's later revealed that something else is going on. All the clues still add up. You haven't really been misled. It's just like you've assumed something that would make sense, and you're shown something that makes as much sense but isn't as obvious. And because of like Nikolai's cleverness as a character, it's very easy for her to like have lots of moments like that where you're surprised by what's going on, and not in like a bad way at all. So yeah, that's why Nikolai is one of my favorite characters. Without going into too much plot spoilery stuff.
Yeah. I guess what we can talk about though in terms of like actual plot events, and I guess like my spoilers for Siege and Storm, because that's all I've read so far. Holy shit, what a fucking introduction. Like
he has a great introduction. Like
yeah, like because I was texting you when I first read it, and I think I was also texting Brooke, but like it is, I think, one of the best character introductions I've ever read in a YA series. Like I think certainly recently, but like maybe of all time, because just the way that like you kind of like I kind of half expected it because I knew that like, you know, everyone had been like you and Brooke especially had been hyping up this like one amazing character that's introduced in Siege and Storm. And so when there was this one pirate king or something that was introduced, I'm like,
He's a privateer.
Privateer, sorry. So yeah, so privateer. And just I think like the entire sequence of like just like kind of like taking control for himself instead of the Darkling, because like they were all on the one ship, right? And then the Darkling was like, and then Nikolai, or what's his name, Stormhond or something, like Stormhond, his cover up name. He was like, yeah, no, fuck you, I'm gonna do my own shit. And he like just basically throws the Darkling into the water. Obviously that's not how it is, but just like they basically just fuck over the Darkling, and to escape they get on a fucking like flying boat. That shit is so cool. I can't wait for that to happen in the series.
And well, that's another
thing. I can't wait to
I
watch
think,
that.
Right? Yeah, I'm very excited for Nikolai in the show. But like even his introduction, I think, is a good example of like the clever writing I was mentioning, in that like you think you know what's going on. Like there's this famous privateer that showed up. The Darklings like offered him money, and then he's screwing over the Darkling because he's on Alina's side apparently, and then it turns out he's not even a privateer. He's the fucking prince of the country.
Yeah.
And it's just like the reveal and like the way it comes across, especially because you have the introduction of tailoring in the first book. Like you have Genya who's there and is able to like, you know, tailor Alina. She tailors herself. She tailors the queen. Like you have this whole thing kind of introduced, but the way Genya is introduced is for very like minimal things. Like, you know, like she'll do a little bit of makeup. She'll do a little bit of touching up, like to hide wrinkles and like bags under eyes and stuff. And it's not really a big thing. Nikolai had his entire face changed to like look like someone else. And I think that's a really good, this is another example of what I think Leigh Bardugo does well with her magic system, is like introduces something and then kind of like ups it in each story, like each subsequent whatever. And I think that was a good way of doing that, is like it was a way of having a good, interesting character introduction and reveal, and then also a way to like increase what the magic is capable of. Mm-hmm. Which she also did again in Rule of Wolves, let me tell you. That's one of the things I was losing my mind over. So I'm not going to go into detail, but like, yeah, the magic is going up in every book, and it's great.
Sweet. I can't wait. I really need to, I don't know, like I've told you this already, Alex, but like just getting through the rest of Siege and Storm is hard.
Yeah. Yeah, the second half of Siege and Storm is a slog.
Yeah, I guess that's just our own mutual thing, though. But, you know, let's not waste more time on that and create our own slog about just how fucking long the second half of Siege and Storm is. Gabe, how about you? Let's start with yours.
Okay. So, my character, the first character that I'm going to talk about, is a character from Chainsaw Man. It's not Makima. I've talked about Makima a lot on this podcast. This is not going to be Makima tonight. Tonight I'm going to talk about a very special character in the Chainsaw Man canon, named Kobeni. Now Kobeni is an interesting case of characters, because Kobeni is in anime, especially in seinen anime or shonen anime and shonen manga, there is a problem that pervades the entire genre, which is plot armor. And basically, like, if you've watched any anime, you've definitely seen this before, where characters just like survive all kinds of nonsense, and it eventually starts to wear down. But Kobeni is a very interesting case, because it's plot armor almost used as like a weapon against the character. So Kobeni's whole deal is that she shows up very early on in the series, and she's portrayed as like this very sort of cutesy, nervous girl who's a part of the Devil Hunter squad. And as a reader, you might think, and I certainly thought, wow, so there's this like nervous fucking young girl who's a part of this Devil Hunter squadron. She's not going to last for a second in a world as fucking ruthless as Chainsaw Man. Wouldn't you know it, we're now 110 chapters past her introduction, and she is one of 3 surviving characters.
Oh. Okay. Oh, wow. All right.
Yeah, so Kobeni's whole deal is that she can't die, but not in a sense that she has ridiculous plot armor, but the plot armor is almost used to hilarious, dark, kind of like bordering on sadistic, but just like absurd comedic effect that she just keeps surviving, yet keeps maintaining this extremely nervous, whimpering, crying, cowardly persona as she is thrown again and again into like these nightmare situations that grow more and more absurd. From the start of the series, it's the pretty standard like situations that she gets thrown into where she has to like fight off devils and fight off devil hybrids and fight off like all these different monsters who are just trying to kill her, and she's constantly being like watching every single person die around her and just becomes more and more mentally scarred until it gets to the point of maximum absurdity in the final chapters of the series when, I'm not fucking joking, she retires from the Devil Hunter force, works at a McDonald's in one of the chapters, and I'm not kidding, a devil attacks the McDonald's, and the chapter is composed of Kobeni desperately trying to make a hamburger for the devil while the devil massacres the McDonald's staff. Dean, you may have seen my little TikTok about this one with Kobeni just desperately crying while making hamburgers at McDonald's. And then it gets worse as it's immediately followed up with a chapter where Kobeni has to fight for her life as a devil is trying to kill her while she plays Dance Dance Revolution for her life.
Okay, hold on.
No, I'm not joking.
I'll save. You know what? I'll save all of my what the fucks for later.
No, save it. No. Go ahead.
No, I don't have any response other than what the fuck.
Yeah.
What the fuck? What the fuck is this anime, and why is it gonna be the best thing that I'll ever watch later? And
immediately following the McDonald's chapter, Kobeni is forced to go on a date with this devil that made her make a hamburger, and then the devil wants her to play Dance Dance Revolution, and in the most iconic, sequence of panels in the series, and the most iconic. Hang on, I'm going to send a picture of it to the chat. It's this thing has become just a totem of the franchise and the fan base. In the most iconic scene in the series, she whimperingly, tearfully plays Dance Dance Revolution.
Oh my god, this poor girl.
Yes, that is the essence of Kobeni. Is this poor fucking girl. As you just watch, like. It's one of the best uses of plot armor that I've ever seen to just outrageous comedic effect. She's a fantastic character. Like every time that she shows up, it's a fucking joy. You know you're gonna have a fucking riot as this girl says the most absurd shit and goes through the most absurd circumstances of just the writer just relentlessly putting her through hell. Another iconic part of Kobeni's character is Kobeni's car. Any Chainsaw Man fans listening to this know exactly what the fuck I'm talking about. But since I don't think anyone in this call has read Chainsaw Man, I'm going to explain what the fuck Kobeni's car is. So in the middle of what is known as the Santa Claus arc, that's unrelated to Kobeni, that it's called the Santa Claus arc. Don't ask.
Okay. Hush, zipping up my mouth right now.
Kobeni joins up with the Devil Hunters once again, and she has a brand new car that she She bought with all of her money that she made devil hunting, scripting and saving for months. And then Power, the series comic relief, gets in the car, immediately crashes it. And Kobeni has to spend the rest of her savings fixing it, only for it to get immediately smashed again in an ensuing shonen battle. This is a small tidbit, but the real deal with Kobeni's car is how the fan base has taken Kobeni's car to new levels. So if you're familiar with like best girl debates and how there's always that one, Kobeni's car has won the best girl debate in the Chainsaw Man fandom for I think a full year now, and it went to the point that when Shonen Jump did an official fan tournament, hilariously, Kobeni's car beat Kobeni in the popularity contest.
Oh my God. This only proves my point that the Chainsaw Man anime will be the best thing I will ever see. I'm so excited because every time you talk more about Chainsaw Man, for unfortunately, for whatever reason, it doesn't make me closer to reading because apparently I don't know how to read anymore. But just the characters that you talk about, especially her. Oh, she's gonna be so fun to watch. There are gonna be so many people simping over her.
Kobeni is my absolute favorite. Every arc that Kobeni is involved in is an absolute joy to read. And yeah, when the anime comes out, I'm gonna
be insane. Like
it's gonna be wild. It's gonna be absolutely wild.
Yeah, and like I guess it's just kind of like a wrap up on this section. Just I'm so excited. Like the hype surrounding Chainsaw Man's thing is like very much valid because like I was thinking like I haven't really read the anime or read the manga, but because of Gabe and like some other like mutuals, just it is going to be insane just how wild all of this shit is gonna translate because like it's probably the most batshit thing that I've ever heard. Like in what other fucking anime does one of your characters continuously come back to an organization that is apparently no good for her, and she gets into a fucking dance revolution thing.
Dance for your life.
Yeah.
Oh god, I didn't even mention the best part. Like there's I didn't even mention the best part about the Dance Revolution thing. So the Dance Revolution got to such a point that one absolute genius, made an not official, but a fan-made fucking rhythm game where you play Dance Revolution.
Oh my god!
Next to a little cartoon of Kobeni that correlates with the inputs.
Just what the fuck? Oh my god. All right. Case in point, exactly. Everything that I hear about Chainsaw Man is completely just fucking nuts. But I think to save me the breath of just continuously trying to say what the fuck all the time, let's move on.
Yep.
Marie-Soleil, your first pick, please.
So I wanted to talk, both of my characters are from the same book series, but I'm going to talk about Tris first. Trisana Chandler is such a precious little bratty girl.
Which series is this from again? Sorry?
It's from the Circle of Magic series by Tamora Pierce. I know I've spoken about the author before, and I believe the series before.
Yeah, I recognize the author's name now, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Tris is... So, all four of the main characters of the book series have very traumatic past. Her past is traumatic in a different way than the others, who, like, all of their parents are dead. Her parents gave her up. She has ambient magic with weather, which means she can, to a degree, control weather patterns. And when she'd get upset, this would act out of her control. There, like it says in the books, one time her father was lecturing her outside and the ground started to shake and he sank to his waist in the soil of their yard when she had a tantrum. She's made it hail indoors, made lightning strike trees nearby. But every magic seer that they hired to come test her said no, she doesn't have magic. So they thought she was possessed by a ghost or an elemental creature and passed her off from family member to family member until her great aunt kept her as basically a housekeeper for 3 years and then died. So they sent her off to a temple, which also sent her away to a different temple under the guy teacher Nico Goldeye, who saw that she had ambient magic and that she just needed to learn how to control it. And she, growing up this way, she learned not to trust anybody. She's only 10 years old when the series starts. She doesn't trust anyone. She thinks everybody's going to is out to use her, and if not, they will abandon her when they realize what happens around her. She has no control of it. And it honestly terrifies her.
Right.
And I just love her character development throughout the series, where she goes from not trusting anybody. Like, there's a quote from another character who uses the proverb, not all 9-fingered girls played with hatchets. Some try to have a conversation with a snapping turtle, relating Triss to the snapping turtle. And her magic is some of the most powerful in this series and the least understood, because most weather mages can call a storm that's already in existence, can call a storm to them if they need rain. She creates a water spout because her friends are being beaten up after they tried to save a puppy that was being tortured.
Holy shit.
When she's 10 years old. At 10 years old, she summons lightning and destroys a fleet of ships that attacked her home. But the trauma that gave her, the nightmares that gave her, made her swear to never perform war magic, ever. And she could be the most well-paid person in the world if she used her magic for war. But she refused to do so, to the point where she actually has plans. At the end of the author had planned to write another book of her going in under a fake name to learn academic magic, so she could make a living using spells and potions and talismans instead of her weather magic.
Mm-hmm.
And in one of the later books in the series, there's an empress who's cousins with one of the other main characters, but she wants to keep all 4 of these very powerful mages in her country. But she knows the most powerful is Triss. And so she specifically has her, she has a curse laid for Triss so that she cannot leave the country. But she makes it specifically that it doesn't kill her because she wants her power.
Ooh.
And it doesn't matter how long she is known. The story is very found family. When all of these kids who are all about 10 years old come to the same temple and they live in this cottage called Discipline, which the cottage isn't a punishment. It's called Discipline because they're there to learn discipline and to learn how to control their abilities. She doesn't trust any of them. She doesn't trust that Sandry, the noble, is trying to be friends with her out of the goodness of her heart. She doesn't trust Briar, the thief boy that lives with them. She doesn't trust Daja, who is whose family were traders, as in they trade items, not traitors. I hope, just making sure that's clear. But she doesn't trust any of them, to the fact that, at the very end of the series, while she trusts them with her life, she still doesn't tell them how extensive her magic has gotten, because they know she can hear things on the wind. She hears conversations on the wind, but she learns how to see things on the wind as well. She doesn't tell them that because she's still terrified that they will abandon her because of the trauma she went through in her past. And I love that even though she grows in certain aspects, where she still, the author doesn't erase the trauma that her past gave her.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite quote from her, and this is probably why I identified with her so much as a child, is that she's reading a book and her foster sister interrupts her, and she says, I was reading, Sandry. You are always reading. The only way people can ever talk to you is to interrupt. And then Triss is like, then maybe they shouldn't talk to me.
God, she sounds like a wonderful character. I bet power and magic system aside, which is from the sounds of it, very nice. Just she sounds like the kind of character that like when she's thrown into a scene with other characters, like I would love to see just how really she kind of like plays off of other characters, because like just that level, like that kind of personality where like you're like very sure to yourself, but you're also like, it's a weird way of saying this, but like you're confident but you're traumatized. That shit's great. I want to see that kind of character interaction.
I love it, and I love her, and I love there's little things about her character that stay the same throughout the entire series. Like it is a pseudo medieval time with kings and dukes and such, and very like old fashioned beliefs. And she starts out wearing skirts, and she never stops wearing skirts or dresses, even though like out of the 4 characters, there were 3 of them are female, and the other 2 sometimes move away from skirts and into trousers and pants. But Triss is always like, she's always more comfortable in her skirts, and I love it's a lot different from a lot of the books in this time frame, where part of a woman or a girl's liberating moments is when she can get rid of her skirts and start wearing pants, because who cares if she's wearing guys' clothes? She's powerful.
Yeah, we love powerful characters. We stan power.
Yep. And power can wear skirts.
Yeah. Take that on a t-shirt. I don't know how to end that. So we'll do that. If we see that shirt,
I want it.
If you see, if that shirt exists, then we want it. But if you stole that shirt from us, pay Marie-Soleil her royalties.
Or just send me a shirt, like for free. Just give me a shirt for free. I want it.
Yeah, she won't press charges after that. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, Tyler, your first case study.
All right, so this is going to be a tough one. I'm talking about Kvothe from the Kingkiller Chronicles, of which there are only 2 out of 3 books out. Name of the Wind, A Wise Man's Fears, with the 3rd, Doors of Stone. We don't know where that is, when it's coming. They're all by Patrick Rothfuss. And for a long time, they were my favorite books by far and above. And they're still really high up on the list. They really are. And it is partially because of, obviously, the author, the writing, and the world building, all the aspects that play into it. And so it's really hard for me to separate Kvothe himself as a character from the world in which he's part of. There's a lot of spoilers to be had, and I'm going to try to avoid them. But I'm sorry if I spoil certain things. C'est la vie. So Kvothe is our main character. He is supposedly the titular Kingkiller, which the Chronicles are named after, though we actually have no idea who the hell he killed. We're 2 books in, and we still don't know. The entire book is poised around a framing device near the end of Kvothe's life, where he has done everything in the Kingkiller Chronicles themselves and is now sitting in an inn that he owns, telling his story to a biographer. And that's the big framing device. Every couple of chapters, we're back in the inn in present time, where Kvothe is talking to this chronicler and running his inn and interacting very normally with the people of the village in which his inn is situated. But the body of the story takes place in the past, as if we're reading this biography that this chronicler, as he's called, is writing down. That out of the way, that's the story setup. I'm not going to talk about Kvothe specifically. The entire story goes from when he is, I want to say, 8 years old, something like that, to obviously present time. So we go through a lot of this character's life. And I'm not often one for this type of story. I'll be entirely honest. I don't want to hear about kids and teens running around saving the world. Not my jam. I love this one because though he is the main character, he's not a main character for a while. He struggles. He's homeless for a bit, completely orphaned, tragic backstory stuff. He has to scrounge, claw, kick, and steal his way into any of the positions of power that he ends up coming into. Only much later in life does he get handed one or two, but that's beside the point. Everything he has, he's earned. Quite literally through struggle, blood, sweat, and tears. That goes to say, by the end of the second book, he is finally financially stable. It's taken 2 books and about 12 years to get there, but I digress. It's a very interesting moment in the characterization when he does become financially stable. Not my favorite part, but it's an interesting development nonetheless. If I were to sum up what makes me really love Kvothe, it's his cleverness. His cleverness is his greatest attribute, by far and above. He clevers his way into university. He clevers his way into secret libraries, castles, into a secret hidden monk school. He is your quintessential D&D bard wrapped up into level 20 far before he gets that age. A little less magical, but only a little. And while I've described him as, powerfully clever, learning magic, getting into all these places, he's still an extremely flawed character. He has anger issues. He has revenge problems against what happened in his past. He also gets distracted by basically side quests as he's going around the world doing different things. And I find that when I'm reading a lot of the time a story that is a well-built world on top of everything, that the author is using their characters as a vessel to show off the world they've built. I never felt that with Kvothe. What I feel instead is that Kvothe is a natural extension of the world. He fits. Mm-hmm. Everywhere he goes, he fits because he is a product of the world and the things within it. And he does pretty much everything. I'll be entirely honest. It's one of my only complaints about the series is he's in university. He learns martial arts. He learns sword fighting. He learns super secret magic. Then he also learns a bit of alchemy, a bit of rune magic. He's an amazing lute player and singer on top of all of this. There's not a thing in the world he doesn't experience, but it doesn't feel shoehorned in ever. And that's an amazing talent of writing on the author to make it feel like every piece of this character fits. And that what really makes
is a talent, yeah.
It's insane the way it's done. And I love everything about Kvothe, every bit of his flaws that he fully admits he has. He is a fully realized character. And because we see so much of his life, we realize where every one of his personality traits comes from. Everything is logically tied into who he is and the story he is. And what's really interesting is seeing all the different points of his life, from the homeless orphan child to the university student to the student abroad to this middle-aged man running an inn after all his adventures are said and done. And to see that Kvothe as compared to the Kvothe of the story he's telling is amazing, because they're completely different characters and you have no idea why. and you need to find out. And that's one of the biggest things about the book is he's got about 1 billion story threads to tie up in this 3rd book, and no one is exactly sure how he's going to do it all, but damn are we excited. But that's Kvothe. I had to pick a character from the Kingkiller, and I decided with the main one, though I'll be honest, almost any of the characters in it could very well be my favorite.
Sounds like a it sounds like a very similar situation, I think, to maybe Gabe's with Chainsaw Man. Just so many interesting characters, so little time to talk about it.
And I know Lee has read Name of the Wind, so she can corroborate my tale of his change in character throughout the different phases of his life. But I don't think you've read A Wise Man's Fear, right?
I haven't read A Wise Man's Fear, but I can confirm the character development and care that goes into character development that builds off itself and makes sense is amazing.
That's good.
Yeah, he's a main character that doesn't really suffer from main character syndrome. It's phenomenal. And I'm not even touching on his relationship with who we're pretty sure is the main love interest, because I've got a little quote here I want to share. Oh no, I copied the wrong one. Hold on just a second. There's a line attributed to him. Kvothe killed a demon for the sake of a woman and fought an angel to keep her. And that is some really metal shit and seems unnecessarily like edgelord for the story. But given the mystery of who this character is, and the fact that we've never heard of angels and really haven't heard of demons, why are these monikers being used? Hello, can you teach me anything about your world building? Please tell me something. I'm so lost, but I love it.
I want to give like a very quick acknowledgement just to like Kvothe's look. I love that look so much. Because like I'd love to comment on like the character, but I obviously am unfamiliar with the character. But just like a quick Google search of the character's look, he looks great.
Yeah, he is a Irish bard. For those who don't know, he is called Flame Hair because he has some nice bright red hair. He has pretty green eyes. Often wears a green cloak, which is later turned into a cloak of shadows in book 2. I'm not going to spoil why that happens. Read that yourself. It's the first time I've ever read a main character losing their virginity and didn't know they were having sex. Yeah, I'm not going to spoil that. If you're going to read it and message me when you reach that scene. It was great.
It's gonna be a while because like there is I don't want to give it away, but there is still the series that or the like another series that you're gonna be talking about in your other character discussion that I also need to start. Like my sister has book 1 of said series, and I'm excited to read it when she's done with it. But yeah, just I'll definitely give it a look for sure.
It's a long one. I will warn you. There's a very good audiobook for it. I forget who the reader is, but he does some phenomenally on-point accents for the different cultures that are encountered within the game. I think he did work with Patrick Rothfuss to decide on the speaking mannerisms used. Just phenomenal. Just phenomenal. So if you can't read it, listen to it. Phenomenal.
All right. Well, there's everyone's recommendation too. Just... let's do it together. We'll stream it. We'll stream the audiobook, assuming that doesn't get taken down. I'm going on a tangent. Anyway, Lee.
Hello. So, first thing I want to say is the character that I'm going to nerd out about for the next little bit was first published in 1989, and the last book he's in was published in 2011. So, beware, there will be spoilers here. I feel like it's been 10 years. If you're going to read it, you probably already have. So, the character I'm going to talk about is Samuel Vimes of the Discworld series. Now, has anyone read the Discworld series at all?
No.
No? Okay. So, it's essentially... the Discworld started as a satire of the fantasy genre. And one of the books, they just take tropes. The first couple books take tropes and then they turn them on their head. So the first book about this character starts off with a delightful dedication. And that dedication is like in the beginning of, I'm not going to read it out verbatim, but it essentially states in the beginning of every movie, every fantasy novel, there's a point when someone screams, "Guards, guards." And then a whole bunch of men rush into the room, valiantly fight the main character one at a time, and die miserable deaths. No one asked them if they wanted to do it, and this book is dedicated to them. The book is called Guards, Guards, and it's about Captain Samuel Vimes, who is the commander of the Watch. And he's a really interesting character because he starts off as the end point of most cop procedural dramas, where you know how you start as a young rookie cop and you're optimistic and you're full of vim and vinegar and you want to change the system and everything's good, and then you're degraded into cynicism. Samuel Vimes, through the 8 books he's in, does the opposite. You start Guards, Guards, and it is literally him in the gutter complaining about the city that he lives in. And at the very end of the series, it's him as a duke and a whole bunch of other titles that I'm not going to quite spoil all of them because he gets an entire laundry list of them, looking over his city and deciding he's going to go for a vacation with his wife and son. So that in itself is a very interesting character dynamic. But what I want to talk about with Samuel Vimes, and one of my favorite things about him, is that he goes through such a dramatic change, but the core of his personality throughout 8 books remains the same. And it builds off themselves. So I'm going to focus on a couple of books here. I'm going to focus on Thud, Snuff, and The Night Watch, because those are the books that I have on hand, quite frankly. I don't have too many offhand. But one of the main themes that is portrayed with Vimes, and it's actually really interesting because he started writing him in the 80s, like the late 80s, early 90s, but many of the things that are portrayed through this character are actually really relevant today. And lots of them are about policing and how you can be either a police, like a policeman can't be a soldier of the government. And so I suppose I really like Samuel Vimes. Sorry, I'm rambling. I apologize. I really like Samuel Vimes because he is angry, but he's kind in his anger. So there's a scene in Feet of Clay, which is a little mystery about he's trying to find the person who's killing the tyrant of the city. Because Ankh-Morpork doesn't have a king, it doesn't have a regent, it has a tyrant. But someone's killing the tyrant and now everything's breaking down. So he has to find the person that is killing the tyrant. And throughout this, he's going through the entire castle staff. He's trying to find it all. And he finds out that the castle servants have just been stealing a whole bunch of shenanigans as perks from the patrician or the tyrant's room. And so the normal progression of this is generally you go catch the thief, you go talk to the thief, and you make them feel bad about it. But one of the key facets of Samuel Vimes is that he was a poor kid growing up. And so he goes, talks to these people, and he doesn't mention any of it. And he's very careful and very kind in how he portrays and talks to these people because they aren't criminals, they're desperate. And the books and Samuel Vimes makes a very big distinction between a desperate person and a criminal person. And sometimes they are the same, but it's one of the things that really resonates with me about the character. Another thing that really resonates with me about the character is this quote. It's from the same book, and it's about, in the end, he finds the big bad who's trying to almost destroy the city and has personally attacked Vimes and his family many times. And the quote is right when he's sitting, he's defeated this person and is arresting them, and he is contemplating about how he could technically kill this person. No one would blame him. No one would have to know. And then his internal dialogue continues like this. It's only crimes can take place in darkness. Punishment has to be done in the light. That was the job of a good policeman. Sorry, Carrot always said to light a candle in the dark. And that's the entire character of Sam Vimes wrapped up in a bow. Because Sam Vimes is a very interesting character that falls squarely into the idea of lawful good, but not lawful nice. And I even say lawful in a very wishy-washy way, for as much as a pseudo medieval fantasy city can have a lawful character. I suppose part of my love of him is that I am a nerd for the development of laws and the development of cities. And throughout the books, you get to see the story of this city and the law system of it develop. Another thing I really like about the character is that consistently he is like completely anti-authoritarianism, and it's hilarious because towards the end he becomes one of the authorities of the city. And it's even stated in the books, like the tyrant of the city makes a point to be like, I've always considered that you've had an anti-authoritarian streak. And he's just like sitting there silently because he doesn't want to get in trouble. And the tyrant keeps continuing talking and is like, but it seems that you've managed to maintain your anti-authoritarianism while being one of the authorities. And that's practically zen of you. So I don't know how much justice I'm doing this character because there's 9 books and he develops so well throughout all of them because you can't really focus on one. Because the nice thing about this character too is that he builds on his growth and his expansion every single book. So in Guards, he starts as a drunk. That's what he is. And the nice thing about this, and something I really like in the portrayal of the character, is that he always admits to people and he always tells them straight up that I am an alcoholic. But he never has a drink. Which is something I really appreciate because they kept that as a character thing. It didn't just go away when he got married, when he had suddenly a better job. It was something he struggled with throughout the entire series. The last thing, and I realize this is really rambling, that I'm going to talk about is the idea of self-control within this, and particularly self-control of people in authority. Because there's many times in the book, like when he fights a werewolf, and he's contemplating with himself whether he should use some snappy dialogue before he kills him, before he's like, no, because if I use snappy dialogue, if I try and make a show out of this isn't self-defense anymore, it's murder.
Right.
There's also a part in the book, and it's really lame, because I don't want to go into the symbolism of the Discworld too much, but Sam Vimes is always paired with darkness, and things that are hidden with darkness, and the ability to resist your baser desires. But in the very first book, the last thing that you read is an idea that the patrician or the tyrant of the city holds, that there's a base level of evil in the world. And it's not right or wrong, there's just a base level of evil in the world, and you have to deal with it. And the only way you can deal with it is that you force people to view turning away from it as better for them than turning towards it.
Mm-hmm.
But in the second book, at the very, very end, third book, it's a book about a golem. And golem throughout the entire series, up to this point, in the entire universe, have been considered non-sentient. But Feet of Clay goes out of its way to say, no, these are people. This is wrong. And so it was found out that Vimes and the City Watch ended up giving a golem a tongue so it could speak for itself. And he's sitting with the same petition that says level of evil in the world, and it has to happen. And the petition says, in order to keep the peace, the golem will have to be destroyed. No, sir. And then The tyrant, the guy who runs the city, he keeps a literal scorpion pit to shove mines in because they piss him off. Says, allow me to repeat my instruction. No, sir. I'm sure I just gave you an order, Commander. I distinctly felt my lips move. No, sir. He's alive. He's just made of clay Vimes. Aren't we all? According to them pamphlets Constable Visit keeps handing out anyway. He thinks he's alive, and that's good enough for me. So that is a direct flip against the proposed idea earlier in the series where there is a baseline of evil that everyone has and will eventually succumb to. And Vimes as a character keeps turning back to this idea where, yes, you will be tempted. Yes, there's kind of like, it's easier to do crappy things. But you as a person can choose to say no. And the little no's build up to big no's. And yeah, I think I'm going to stop my rant here. But
it was a good rant, yeah.
Vimes. Thank you. He's a really good character. If you ever want to read Discworld, I would start with the City Watch series. But yeah, no, I didn't spoil too much actually.
Well, I mean, like, I think you've teased quite enough, especially for me at least, who has never really heard of the series. Like, and you know, not to kind of explore tangents a little bit too much because we do have to move on to our second round robin, I guess. But like,
feel like it was long, so I apologize.
No, it's fine. Just it seemed like, I think the one thing that I do want to quickly comment on is just the fact that like he seems to be like a very like, I know saying complex is very vague, but just like the way that he balances this and this and this and this, like listening to you do as much justice as you can for this character is just, I love that. I love when characters like not just try to balance like two different sides, but like really try to stay true to their like try to stay true to like their original intent. And just, it's always like I think when, because you praise it so well and you had been speaking on it for quite a while, it seems like it does a phenomenal job, I think.
It does, and I feel bad because I tried to condense a character that's spread through 8 novels into this, but he's honestly my favorite. So I know I didn't do him justice, but you guys should check him out.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, like, it is pretty difficult to kind of condense like a lot of like a series worth of information down into just what, like 10-12 minutes. And it's funny I say that because I'm going to try doing that with a series, but
I wish you luck.
Yeah, well, I'll try to keep it relatively short because I think a lot of people have already dissected this character enough, and she is 11 from Stranger Things, which I had recently watched actually with a friend of mine, Mari, who, like, I had never seen the show up until then, but I think finally understanding why everyone loved this show, especially why everyone loved 11 more or less, like I finally understood it, because 11 is a great freaking character. Like, I think in season 1 where she is escaping, like she's made her way out of Hawking's laboratory and is, you know, trying to, like, is forming friendships with Mike, Dustin, Lucas, and Will, quote unquote, just their relationship bounces off so well. 11 being this like very unfamiliar, like being very sheltered off for a lot of her childhood. It kind of made sense naturally that she isn't very familiar with a lot of things, and watching her naively trying to understand said things through being around a group of like young boys too, just is really nice chemistry. Like, it's really like she develops really good chemistry with everyone, like within that group, especially like even when it can be a bit rocky sometimes, but you know, this is me just kind of acknowledging like the character relationship. Obviously 11 is the one with powers in Stranger Things, and her powers are great. I don't think I need to comment too much on that, but just like consistently, just she's telekinetic and is also able to, I don't know what the thing is, but like mainly it's around being telekinetic and also having the ability to like see people through like radio static. I think I don't know what it's called specifically, but just it's always a nice like visual showcase whenever 11 uses her powers. And I think even more so in subsequent seasons when she starts getting a hang of it. When in subsequent seasons, actually, just her character gets fleshed out just a little bit more. I think in season 2 in particular, she is she is now forming this like new relationship with Hopper that I didn't really expect, but like it was a really nice change of like it was a really nice direction for these two like really important characters to go in. And throughout the season, like just their butting of heads, their conflicts, their very, very personal and very like intimate relationship at points just was really impressive to watch. And you know, credit is where credit's due to Millie Bobby Brown and David Harbour. They're doing great. They've done a really good job with those characters. I think commenting on season 2, 11 too, just minus the episode where she finds 8, which I wasn't really a fan of, kind of looking back on it. Just 11 now coming into her own and being even more sheltered than she was when she was at Hawkins because of Hopper just adds a lot more. It just adds a lot more tension, and I think I don't want to say impulse, but like just a lot more. I guess I'll just say impulse. Like 11 is making a lot more choices that is befitting of an active protagonist, and I think it was great to see that throughout season 2. In season 3, when I think season 3, I think it's probably where 11's character arc both does really well and kind of suffers just a little bit, because where it does really well is like forming a better relationship with Max, kind of exploring further exploring the relationship that she has with Hopper as a father, especially because now she is now his legal daughter, and just the way that like she behaves around Mike, especially when Hopper's around, like that's always fun to watch those two. And more or less just her character arc, like her being like the center of this, or like being a good like part of like within the center for the longest time in the show, was really nice. And I've always like in the time that I've watched it, it's really nice seeing just how involved 11 keeps being, because like it would be impossible to sideline a character that important and that prevalent within the narrative. And I'm glad to see that like they found, like the showrunners have found like new ways to kind of keep her involved, and even more so I think with the ending of season 3, because of just what happens at the end of season 3. Like I would love to see just like how they would involve 11 even more now that she, you know, spoilers, but like now that she doesn't have her powers, basically. Like what are they gonna do? How are they not only going to involve 11 but involve the buyers again, because obviously at the end of season 3 they moved. But just I guess as a closing point, finally after so long of not watching Stranger Things and like hearing so many good things about the characters, and like just how like there were a lot of really good characters in Stranger Things, but I think like 11's is probably the character arc that I was most invested in. A lot of a lot of the characters in the show were great, but 11's was the one that I think was the most interesting to go off of. Like even without the powers, just her naivety towards coming out of like a very secluded childhood, that like her her adolescence then being even more secluded because of because of Hopper kind of essentially like trying to lock her in and keep her, quote unquote, keep her safe, and just how like her relationship gets fleshed out more with not just the main four boys in the show, but like with everyone basically. Just it's lovely to see, and I can't wait for season 4 whenever that happens. Any notes on Stranger Things, or any notes on 11 or Stranger Things, guys?
I do have one thing that I absolutely love about Stranger Things, and you already touched on it, and you touched on it quite a bit, is I love how the main characters, even though they're children, are allowed to grow up. Because I find in a lot of media that has a young protagonist, they're forever in that one spot. And it's harder to do with live action actors because unfortunately actors age. But
unfortunately, question mark?
But if you think about it, when you watch something that has children as a main protagonist, if it's a book series, if it's an animated series, the children don't age unless like someone puts a big amount of effort into it. Right? Because even if you look at the first season of one of the best animation things, Avatar, and towards the end of the season, they go through some character development and they go through different costume changes, but they don't visibly age, and that could just be because it's a short period of time. I haven't actually watched too much of it, but Stranger Things is really refreshing because the characters are allowed to age and they are allowed to develop.
Yeah, and I don't like it doesn't really sacrifice the plot either. Like a lot of events in between, like seasons are conclusive basically. Well, conclusive, quote unquote. Like season 1 ended pretty conclusively, pretty much opening the door to whatever potential story that they could do next. It's seasons 2 and 3, like in subsequent seasons, have basically just been like, okay, let's revisit these, or let's visit these characters again, pick up kind of where we left off about like canonically a year ago, but still kind of like, still kind of keep the tension, but just give these characters like the opportunity to grow and mature and, find new ways of being more rounded out characters without being stuck in the past, I think. That's great. Yeah, I also really enjoy that, the fact that like they don't just like kick the plot off immediately for the next season, or kind of lock these characters into the age that they started. That makes
they
sense.
allow development, which is
and they handled development pretty well actually. But yeah, that's my thing on Stranger Things. I believe Alex is next for their next character.
Yeah, just going in a completely different direction. Sort of. A friend of mine recently got into the She-Ra reboot that came out a few years ago. She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, and they texted me about it, so I decided to rewatch it, and like, it's a good show. Like, it has a lot of really, really good characters, and like this friend and I have been getting in lots of like discussions about like the character development and how all of the characters are really, really complex and stuff. So there's a lot of characters in She-Ra that I could talk about. The character that I decided I want to talk about is the character of Scorpia. And I can't really talk about why she's my favorite without like spoiling the whole thing, spoiling her arc, I guess. So spoiler alert. But Scorpia is a character that starts off, like many of the main characters in the show, on the side of like the villains. She's with the Horde, which is the bad guys in the show, and she works with Shadow Weaver and Catra and Hordak, who are like some of the main antagonists. And she's, right from the start, she's very interesting because a lot of the people in the Horde are very like sad a lot, I guess, or angry all the time. Like there's a lot of very like negative emotions, I guess, going on. And Scorpia's just like bright and bubbly, and she's happy, and she's just there to like make friends. And she loves giving hugs and stuff, and she has like a very positive outlook compared to a lot of the other characters that she's surrounded with, which makes her like really interesting right from the get-go. And then you kind of start to learn more about her backstory. You find out that the reason that she's with the Horde is because they've kind of like taken over her family's land. Thank you. Yes, she's great. Amazing. Like they've taken over her family's land, and so she's just kind of like grown up in this environment. And one of the things that I like about her, one of the main characters in the show is Catra, who is like for most of the show is an antagonist, and directly opposes the protagonist, Adora, who I'm not really talking about right now. But like one of the things that's really interesting in the show is Scorpia and Catra's relationship, where Catra kind of like Scorpia's just kind of there. Catra doesn't really seem to like her at first. She just kind of puts up with her. But she also has this attitude of like expecting Scorpia to just be there for her, to help her and support her and like just do stuff for her constantly. And for a long time, Scorpia doesn't seem to really realize that. She's very much like she wants to be there for Catra, and she wants to be there and support her, and she wants to like, you know, be her friend. And so like for a long time in the show, there's this kind of feeling of like watching her and going like, no, like this is such a bad relationship for you. I want you to get out of it. And then there's like an episode, I believe in season 4, where like she comes to this realization. She's starting to understand how her relationship with Catra is actually like super toxic. And at the end of the episode, she leaves. And it's like a few episodes later, or it's like a few episodes before Catra realizes she's gone. And I just think like her decision to like leave it's a really powerful moment where, you know, it's all this stuff has been kind of building up and building up and building up. And then it finally reaches like the point where she's like, oh, Catra doesn't care about me the way I care about her. She doesn't want me around as a friend. She's just using me because I'm here. And makes the decision to like get out of that situation, which is like a really, really like powerful moment, I think, in the show. And then like her story doesn't end there. Like she eventually joins the princesses, which are like the good guys. I'm putting that in quotation marks, even though it's technically true. It's just, you know, very basic concept there. But like, so she ends up joining them, and Scorpia herself is also actually a princess, and that's something she kind of struggles with because she grew up in the Horde and has never really felt connected to like the gemstone that like gives, like all the princesses get their powers from gemstones, and she's never really like felt connected to hers before. And so she has to kind of like start going through this character arc of like learning how to use her magic and feeling connected and being like, oh, I am a princess, I am powerful. And she's just a really fun character, and it's really fun to watch her like go from someone with like a positive outlook on life who's always getting like walked over basically, to kind of finding her own place in the world, and eventually even like sacrificing herself to protect the people that she cares about. For a little bit, she's fine, I promise.
Right.
She sacrifices herself temporarily, and then they save her. But yeah, she's just a really fun character to watch develop.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that, because like, just as a really small thing, but she is, I think, my sister's favorite character in that show. I think that's what I remember her telling me. Like, I'd like to understand why.
It's so hard to choose favorites in that show. I also love Entrapta, but I love Scorpia's character arc, and like watching her go yeah, it's a good show.
Yeah, it's one of the earlier shows that like I think you and my sister have been trying to get me to watch for the longest time.
So watch it. Do it.
Okay. I'm really lazy with things. Anyway.
Also, this is like completely irrelevant, but like Scorpia's fancy outfit with like the black dress, like the aesthetic of that is like amazing. She looks so good. I love her character design.
Yeah, I've seen like screenshots of that. Yeah. Wonderful. Really nice. All right. Gabe, let's get to you.
Okay, so my second character is also another character from the twisted brain of Tatsuki Fujimoto made Chainsaw Man, but this is a series that I haven't really talked about a lot on the podcast. Mostly because it's a much harder read, I think, than Chainsaw Man. It's not very action heavy, and there's a lot of content in here that's like not like it's fucked up. But the series I'm talking about is Fire Punch. And the character I'm talking about is Togata from Fire Punch. So it's a quick explanation of what Fire Punch is, because I can't really talk about Togata without talking about what Fire Punch is. So Fire Punch is essentially it's post-apocalyptic. There's superpowers, and there's this kid named Agni, and Agni is in a village. This guy named Doma from a very powerful faction comes along, and Doma has the ability to set fire to things, and the fire that he sets can't be extinguished. It will burn basically until whatever is on fire there's nothing left of it. And Agni's ability is he has like super healing. He can basically heal from any wound almost instantaneously. Doma doesn't know this, and when he sets fire to Agni's village, basically killing everyone, Agni is also caught on fire and is set in this eternal loop of burning to death and healing and burning to death. So Agni spends 8 years sort of adapting to living with being on fire, and then goes on a revenge quest. So that's the basic setup. But where Togata comes in, Togata is where the story gets fucking crazy. And so basically Togata is another character who has sort of an immortal body and can heal it from any wound. But so Togata has lived since roughly before whatever the big ice age hit. And Togata is a film obsessed character. It's sort of like an extension of Fujimoto, because Fujimoto has talked about how like he's a huge film buff, and like before he ever did he ever did manga, he wanted to make movies, and then he sort of like took a lot of what he learned like in films and stuff, and like transported it to how he draws his manga. But essentially, Togata is like a huge film buff. He's sort of like obsessed with movies. There's this whole business about where he's talking about all his favorite movies, and basically it's just like a bit for Fujimoto to dump some of his favorite movies. Togata is basically an extension of Fujimoto in the story, but Togata's role in the story is that Togata finds out about Agni and finds out about this guy who's on fire and on a vengeance quest and is gonna burn down a whole bunch of shit. And Togata becomes obsessed with the idea of filming Agni and making a movie about Agni. And this is where the actual story of Fire Punch comes in. That Fire Punch becomes this character in Togata's film that, like, as Togata is sort of like helping Agni get revenge, but only under the condition that Agni will act out his revenge in the cinematic way that appeals to Togata's film tastes. So you have this insane dynamic where Agni is like basically just trying to get revenge, and Togata will be directing quote unquote directing his like actual horrific violence. And yeah, Togata's a lot of wild nonsense as a character. I don't have a ton to say. I was kind of wanted to keep this one brief because there's a lot that I can't say about Togata that isn't a spoiler. But I think what I like about Togata as a character is that like he more than just like as like a wacky force on the story, it's also just like it's hilarious seeing this character come into this very serious revenge story and sort of like not be taking it seriously, but taking it seriously in his own convictions that have absolutely nothing to do with like anything that the main character is about, but is sort of like a catalyst, and the main character has to work with Togata in order to get his revenge. And it's a very basically as soon as Togata enters the scene, Fire Punch goes from being a very serious revenge story to absolute batshit insanity. And yeah, I love it. I love him. Best boy.
Absolute batshit insanity. Yeah, I wouldn't have expected anything less when you said it was from the same writer of Chainsaw Man. Just
yeah.
From what I know, just yeah. I wish I could comment a little bit more though, because like I wish I could put in some input too, because like unlike Chainsaw Man, I'm even less familiar with this one. With
Fire Punch is one. Yeah, I mean, honestly, I Fire Punch probably isn't going to get an anime adaptation. I think it's a little bit too dark, and it's a little bit too like obscure in just the way that it's written. It's also like, I mean, okay, I'll be honest here. Fire Punch is not as good as Chainsaw Man, and there's a lot of it that is just kind of like, I don't want to say poorly written, but like, because it's not poorly written, but it's very niche. It's very, it's it's difficult to like sort of take a lot of it seriously, and it's very Fujimoto being like sort of a blunt. He's a very blunt writer, and the way that Togata is written is Fujimoto at his absolute bluntest. I've put in the chat one of my favorite quotes, but it's shortly after Togata gets his movie collection burned down, and he's feeling down, and he says, "There's nothing left for me to live for. A life without Toy Story ain't shit."
What?
A life without Toy Story ain't shit.
I know. I've been looking at this for like the last like 10 seconds, just confirming it. I'm like, yeah, all right. I guess that's there.
Gabe, I'm pretty sure I've heard you make that reference without any of us having read this very niche manga of yours, and now I finally appreciate having this context. Thank you.
I have Life Without Toy Story ain't shit like burned into my brain.
I'm sure there are a lot of things burned into your memory, dude, that just probably would scare most mortal men.
It's what?
I don't know. Just I've known you for a while now. That I've said before off conversation, probably on podcast, that like I would just love to see what's inside your head for a good while, and apparently that even scares you. So like, this is going off into a tangent.
Yeah. I mean, I guess what I like. I mean, like Togata is just like Fujimoto does a lot of work that's like kind of like he did a one shot recently, kind of very very autobiographical. So I've heard, and like he puts a lot of himself in his work, but it's not like it's almost like self-critical, and Togata is probably the most like self-critical version because he's just like, it's very obvious if you read it and if you've watched like interviews with Fujimoto that Togata is like supposed to be a self-insert, but it's definitely not a self-insert in the way that we're used to seeing self-inserts. This is a very very self-critical self-insert.
Yeah. Holy shit. All right, well, that's another series that I might not end up reading, even though I say, oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
That's my own fault. That really is my own fault. Anyway, Marie-Soleil, your second case study. I call these case studies, but yeah.
My second character is the foster sister of my first character because I love the series so much and these characters. This is Lady Sandrilene Fatoren, or Sandry as she prefers to be called, is Trisana's foster sister. She is the noble I mentioned before, and because of that, she's very sheltered to an extent. So her tragic backstory comes from the fact that her parents died in a smallpox epidemic. And then her nurse hid her in a storeroom with magic. So locked the door, shielded it with magic so nobody could find her, and then was planning on leading a riot away from the child. The riot got there too soon and killed the nurse right out front of the door. So the only person that knew she was there is dead. She's trapped in there for days, up to a month, I believe, before she is rescued and brought to her uncle, who is the Duke of the land our story takes place in, Emmeline. Sandry has lived her life. Her parents didn't want to be good nobles and stay on their land and run things like they were supposed to. They like to travel. So she's probably the most traveled of our main character cast, but she also is very she's very sheltered in that she doesn't realize how much being a noble has gotten her in her life, because while they go visit other nobles, these nobles don't really want their kids talking to her and getting weird ideas in their head from this weird family that just travels everywhere. So the people she would befriend are like commoners and traders, and she doesn't realize, like, she knows this is hard work, but she befriends these people and then she leaves and goes traveling and befriends people in a different place. And when she's around other nobles, she doesn't fit in, but she also doesn't fit in with the common people. And then she ends up locked in a closet and does magic for the first time when she braids light into her embroidery silk, because she is a thread mage. Her magic comes from fabric and thread. And so many people look down on that. They don't realize how important fabric and thread are to everyday life. Imagine insulting somebody and then suddenly your clothing comes to life. That is terrifying.
That is.
Does this happen?
Yes.
Amazing.
Her uncle suffers from a heart attack, and she's 18 years old, and they won't let her in to see her. So she basically re-sews everybody in this hallway's clothing to the tapestries on the walls so that they cannot get in between her and her uncle's bedroom.
Oh my god, that's so cool.
That's super cool. That's super unique magic.
Yeah.
At one point, a guy is being very pushy towards her. So she sews his pants into the cushion that he's sitting on. He cannot stand up.
Oh my god, that's really cool, actually.
Yeah. And then she's the only mage in living memory to spin magic. She and her roommates, her housemates, foster siblings, are trapped underground at one point, and their power isn't strong enough to do what it needs to protect them. So she takes a bit of each of their power and spins it together, literally combining their magic to make it just a bit more powerful so they can survive at 10 years old. And nobody knows how this is going to impact them in the future, because this has never been done before. She just did it out of pure panic because it was a necessity.
Mm-hmm.
And I just but they also don't talk about it, because it's like, yeah, she was able to do this. I'm sure other people were able to do this because they're 10 years old and they don't really know anything else.
I think that's so. What is it? I think between these two characters, the fact that they're so young makes exploring this kind of magic so fun, because you kind of see it from the perspective of these two really young characters that holy shit, this is so cool. Anything is possible at this point.
Yeah. And then as she gets older, her powers become they obviously get stronger as she grows and she trains more, and it's amazing how many they all get their accreditation at like 14 years old, which is unheard of. Normally you have to be like in your 20s at least. Nobody under 18 gets this, but as it's explained in the book, they get their accreditation both as a leash, because now that they have this, they have to follow the orders of the council that gave it to them.
Right.
It allows them more freedom, so they're allowed to practice their magic and earn money for it, but it also means that they have to follow these laws that are set out. And so at 14, one of these laws is that like if they come across somebody with a magic, they have to either find that person a teacher, or if a teacher they aren't able to find one, they have to teach this person. So at like 15 years old, she also becomes a teacher when she finds a kid that dances magic.
Ooh.
And like when you're reading the books, you kind of forget how young they are until there are certain moments that point it out to you. But also, like, I just love her. And part of it that I wanted to share was the fact that she's willing to burn bridges with people for her family. In her first meeting with one of their other housemates, Sandry and this girl are in a dining hall with a bunch of other well-off young women who are studying at the temple they are at. And she invites her housemate, who's not her housemate yet, she invites Daja to come sit at the table with her and introduces her as Lady Daja. Somebody else is like, if that's a lady, I'm a cat. So Sandry picks up a pitcher of milk, walks over to that table, reads out her pedigree, like her father, her mother, the fact that she's related to the Duke of this land, the Empress of their neighboring kingdom is her cousin. And this girl, her mother is from a merchant family and her father's a baron. So if Sandry says Daja's a lady, then this girl's a cat and pours milk in her plate and says, you best start lapping, kitty. But she never, when you first meet Sandry, she never introduces herself as a noble. She never brings up the fact that she's a noble unless it's to her advantage. She's just Sandry and yeah, she's got family in this country, family in that country. But until they need her to put on her noble breeches, she doesn't.
That's badass. I really like that.
But it also leads her to doing some things with her power as a noble that shock a lot of people. So in a different country, in the country where her cousin is the Empress, Norman, I believe, there is a law there that states if a man kidnaps a woman, takes her off, and she holds her captive, she can sign the marriage contract, and that is legally binding.
Right.
It was originally created because there are in some situations, a man and a woman want to get married, but their families don't support that. So that's partially why this law is in place, so that they can run away together and get married. But there are people that abuse this law. And in the last book, because there are 9 books that tell these characters' story. In the last book, Sandry meets one of them, and in the span of meeting this woman, hearing her story, she basically legally divorces them, hires her on as her maid, and also hires her 2 young children as pages, so that she can save them from this abusive man.
Wow.
And she uses her power as a noble to do stuff like that, but she also doesn't really want to stay and be the noble of this land, kind of thing. And it's interesting to watch her grow up and realize that she has to take responsibility of the land that the power that she has, or give up that part of that power in order to live the life she wants.
Yeah, that's a lot of responsibility actually for a young character.
Yeah, at that point she's, I want to say 19, when she is realizing that she has to give up the lands that have given her a lot of the power, or give up the life of freedom she wants and live here and actually run these lands. I love her, and there's so much I could talk about her.
Yeah. Well, maybe we should dedicate an episode to that.
Just me going off about Tamora Pierce's the Circle of Magic books.
There's certainly some other things that we've all kind of gone off about. Just if you're passionate about it, then always more power to that passion, I guess. Passionate rants are always like the best things to listen to personally.
Mhm.
But yeah, until we'll wait with bated breath, I guess.
Sounds good. I highly recommend these books to people. Like, there are some problematic aspects of these books, but they were written in like the 90s. I want to say the 80s or the 90s. So there is a bit of aspects of racism that come into play and white saviorism, but like at a whole, I think they're really good books.
Well, that's good. Right. Tyler, you're up.
All right. So my next character is, I would deign to say, an antagonist, though I'm never quite sure in this series. The series is the Locked Tomb series by Tamsin Muir. Specifically, I will be talking about John Gaius, who is the Emperor, the Necrolord Prime, the Kindly Prince, the King Undying, that whole laundry list of titles we've discussed a few times for fun characters. So I'm specifically talking about Harrow the Ninth, which is the second book in the series. He does not feature prominently in the first book, Gideon the Ninth, and it's going to be real hard not to spoil this one. I think I did okay with Kvothe and the Kingkiller, but this is very important character, very hard not to spoil. Also, not a very prominent character. I say antagonist. I wouldn't even consider him a main antagonist. In fact, I don't even consider him an antagonist for the main characters specifically. He is a antagonist for other side characters. And the style of writing that Tamsin does is fantastic. And the very atypical story structure, especially in Harrow, really lends to the reader's confusion, which I love being a lost reader. I'm sure I've said it before. I love not knowing what's going on in a book, as long as it's done well. You can't just throw random words at me. You still have to make it a pretty story, but I love leaving a book with questions. And The Locked Tomb, both books, I need so many answers. But on to the Emperor. And I'll state that I really hate the whole trope of a galactic empire or a space opera empire just because it is so damn overdone. But I really love this version of it and this Emperor because it offers a very different perspective, and he's a very different character from any tyrant emperor that we've ever seen in the past. He is about 10,000 years old, approximately, because once you get that high up, you kind of stop counting. He is claimed to be the first necromancer in the series, and necromancy features very heavily in the series. It is 90% about necromancy to some extent in space. It's a very interesting series. He is the lord of the entire system which the series takes place in, and as such is touted as kind of the god. And indeed, Harrow refers to him as God a few times, since her character, the main character, Harrow, is to some extent a nun for this god. But as you interact with God, per se, in this book, you realize just how human he is. He offers a very different perspective on an immortal character because he is fully immortal. It is discussed in this. And when we get to those immortal or long-lived aged characters, there's often the idea of an alien perspective due to age, which is a perspective I like and I've seen done very well. But this offers an entirely different feel for it, and it comes out very well in Tamison's writing. She writes some very opposite characters going through this entire series, from the first book being about Gideon and Harrow, and the two of them being polar opposites. A lot of the characters are very dual natured, and the Emperor is no exception. When you think of a god who's lived 10,000 years and brought humanity back from the edge of extinction, you'll think in terms of what we've seen of emperors. A lot of pomp and circumstance, a lot of big grand words and speeches and smiting. And he does that every now and again. But then he's also very human out of nowhere, because he is still a human. And 10,000 years living with other humans, it doesn't really go away, which is a perspective I've never seen done. There's no real character development for him. He's only features in small parts of the book and anecdotes. But there is a little section I want to share about him, and two little spots, both in the last chapter of the book. And I'm not going to spoil anything by reading these, I don't think. So he's being asked to say the name of a certain antagonistic villain character in this last chapter. Yeah, I'm not going to spoil too much. This both contributes to him and contributes to Tamison's writing. All of it, Gaius. There was a preparatory sound of indrawn breath. And then he says, "Awake remembrance of these valiant dead. Kia hua ko tepaya. Snap back to reality. Oops, there goes gravity." He recited, all in one breath.
Is that the actual line? That's amazing.
That is a line. That is the character we're referencing's name.
Oh,
Awake remembrance of these valiant dead. Kia hua ko tepaya. Snap back to reality. Oops, there goes gravity.
That's amazing. That's so
the whole
cool.
character's name.
That's so cool.
It's different, right?
Oh, yeah.
And to say that every character is a dual-natured character, and this is accurate. And you go from the Emperor speaking about how he saved humanity and all these epic tales, and then you go back to that, which has a line from an Eminem song in the name, which he just casually rattles off.
Mm-hmm.
And then my second example is very similar. "You have my loyalty," Ianthe interrupted. "Choice," he said as she crossed the room. "Obvious enthusiasm. Great stuff. This is what I like about you." He says choice, which I believe is 90s and early 2000s song for just, an agreeance phrase. The Emperor of Mankind, 10,000 years old, just used slang from the 90s. And it's that interesting duality that lends to his personality. 10,000 years, he's still a human, which is why he's one of my favorite characters in the entire series, even though we don't truly get to see all that much of him. Every bit we do get to see lends to a very interesting take on a character trope that I just would never have expected in a million years. He goes from an interesting father and mentor character to this spiteful, smiting god to, at one point, a very gentle and flirty man to a 90s surfer dude saying choice, all in the span of his character interactions in the book. And like I said, it just gives me a different perspective on what I would consider a tired old trope. And I really like him for it. And once again, the fact that he's not really a main character. He's not the main antagonist of our dear Harrow, who's going through a lot of shit in this book, might I say. And again, I hope I didn't spoil anything in this. It's worth the read. Anyone who wants to read through these, Gideon and then Harrow, and I believe we've got 2 more books incoming, hopefully as soon as possible. The whole system of reveal about his personality, the character mirrors the reader when it's revealed just how human John is. to Harrow in the book, she's surprised as shit. And I think the author was using that as a kind of satire on, hey guys, look what I did. You're surprised? So's the character. I knew what I was doing. I knew exactly what I was doing.
Yeah.
And again, just lends to the writing. Really, really does. So yeah, John Gaius, the Necrolord Prime, choice character.
Drops mic, walks off. Tyler's done.
Microphones are expensive. Don't drop microphones.
Politely puts it down.
Put it back in its stand. That's where it belongs.
Yeah. That was a good thing. That was a good explanation without any spoilers. Because I think it's because of you, Tyler, that I've really been excited for this series, and just while thing, I'd like to go in, whenever I started, I'd like to go in with as little information as possible, but just I understand that maybe there are just some things for the sake of discussion right now, but also that you just really can't not talk about, especially with such a cool and powerful yet human character all the same.
Like I said, he made me, Tamsin with the Emperor made me rethink how I want to do Immortals quite a bit, because I used to love that whole alien concept, look at my infinite perspective sort of deal. But really, if a human could live that long, how much humanity would we lose? And it's an interesting thought. It really is.
That's a good point.
How human would we stay?
Yeah, that's a really good point, actually. Existentialism. Amazing stuff. All right. I guess, Lee, let's close it off with you.
Hello. So I want to preface this by once again saying the source material I'm pulling out for this one is from 2008 and 2012, and they're comic books. So I feel like if you're going to read this comic book arc, you've already read it, or most of it has already been spoiled, just because of the nature of comics. And the second thing I want to do is I want to put a quick trigger warning on some of the topics I was discussing. And if anyone is uncomfortable, I am totally open to discussing another facet of this character. And that is, there's a trigger warning because one of the study cases I'm going to bring up involves suicidal ideation. And another character study brings up involves a terminal patient choosing to die. So, with that out of the way, is everyone still comfortable if I cover those topics? Because if you aren't, I do have other things prepared.
I'm good with it.
I'm good.
I'm good with it.
Okay, I just like to check because I realized I would normally have prefaced that in the beginning when we were talking off the chat, but then I realized I didn't. So I just wanted to make sure everyone was fine because I don't want to make anyone uncomfortable.
Much appreciated now than never.
Yeah. So, without further ado, the character I'm going to talk about is one that I have been enjoying his popularity lately, and it's Deadpool. Specifically, Deadpool portrayed in the 2008 Cable and Deadpool comics, as well as the issues run from 2012 to 2015, 2017. And something I enjoy, the main thing I enjoy about this character, is the dichotomy in the character himself. Because Deadpool starts, and the very first issue starts by a picture of Deadpool throwing cats shooting 2 machine guns at essentially a face of Godzilla. And then it continues into this bombastic storyline where Deadpool is fighting the undead presidents of the United States. And it's hilarious. There's one scene where he's fighting Taft and General Lincoln, whose head got decapitated, so they sewed it onto a rubber duck in a boss fight. And it's amazing. It's hilarious. And if you look at the colors themselves, they're all very bright. They're all very, bombastic, because that's what Deadpool is. He's largely a comedy character. And it's amazing. He's known for his comedy, his sex jokes, his fart jokes, and his poop jokes. And he's a great character for it. However, in the issues that I'm going to be talking about the most, which are the good, the bad, and the ugly character arc, it specifically deals with a part of Deadpool that is always bubbling below the surface, and it specifically deals with the fact that Deadpool, while being a hilarious character, that's not exactly all he is. And I know that sounds a bit pretentious because he is Deadpool and he's ridiculous, but I feel like Deadpool is such an interesting character because he is allowed to be all of those things. Now, comic book characters, especially Batman, fall into a problem where they reset the universe every 5 seconds. And they do it so they can get that issue 1 started again so people can pick it up. Deadpool suffers from this just like everyone else does, but because Deadpool has canonical memory problems, he canonically has issues relating to people and is generally isolated, he's allowed to keep more of his personality because Deadpool is a blank slate. I also have to tip my hat to the current writers of Deadpool from around 2012 on, because no matter what they throw at him, even when they created a Zen pool in the Marvel universe where they had everyone's character traits invert on themselves, they still stayed true to the core of the character that they had developed, which isn't necessarily something that happens in comics often. Batman. So, what I want to discuss is a series of comics where Deadpool goes from this bombastic character to honestly a tragic character in a series of 5 issues. And this is largely done because when they were first doing this, they did a few gag release of comics where they were quote unquote back issues. And they had all of the hail marks of a trade paperback that was released in the 70s with the really bad color jobs, the specific style of narration, and the specific ways they laid out the comics. So it was very well done. But there's a one-off joke in one of them where Deadpool in the 70s has sex with a lady as just a side thing in one of his things. 2 issues later, you find out that actually happened. And the thing with Deadpool is you're never sure whether what he narrates is true or what he narrates is his own memory problems. Because Deadpool throughout the series has been periodically knocked out, and people have been cutting out parts of his body for scientific research. And so he only notices this when, and this is a completely different plot point, so I'm not going to touch on it, but just trust me, comic books are weird, when the person who is riding in his body, because they died and no longer have a body to inhabit, so they shove them in Deadpool's mind, notices that he gets knocked out and his organs are harvested. So he starts trying to investigate this, and eventually, when they target him next time, he fights them, he wins, he starts trying to figure out why this is happening. And they get far enough along in the explanation before the person is ganked by the powers that be that they discover that it is a Weapon X remnant that is trying to study Deadpool. So he goes, and this is where the good, the bad, and the ugly kind of come in, because he goes to the other super soldiers that are established in the Marvel Universe. And this also acts as a contrast to Deadpool, because Deadpool, unfortunately, gets the bad end of the stick super soldier-wise, because there's Captain America, who was able to maintain, he got the best of the best. He got the first serum. He turned out great. He didn't know Shadow Organization tried to control his life or traumatize him. And then you have Wolverine, who started out, he got his superpowers, then he had a really, really rough go, became an anti-hero, and then morphed himself into a hero. And then you have Deadpool, who has, through getting his super soldier serum, has become basically a self-regenerating tumor that is constantly dying but is constantly reviving, which is actually, if you think about it for 5 seconds, is actually pretty awful, and it's something that's mentioned a lot because he's always in pain. So the fact that you can have a backstory like that, and a character like Deadpool who can fight Abraham Lincoln the Rubber Duck, is really cool. But the main thing I want to talk about this, and the main thing that really interests me in Deadpool, is his relationship with agency and characters that are suffering or characters that are having a bad time. So the particular issue that I am going to kind of use as my case study is issue 17 of the 2012 run. And issue 17 of the 2012 run starts with not issue 17. It's one of those. It probably issue 15 now that I think about it. It starts with with 3 panels of a flashback, and the dialogue in the flashback is literally the first thing that is said is, "I want to die. No more," and then Deadpool tries to walk out of the trials for the Super X soldier thing, right? Sorry, the Weapon X facility. And the last panel is a nurse telling him, "It's too late for you to change your mind. It's too late for you to try and back out or try and own this. You have made your decisions, and this is your life now." Which is pretty messed up, but also is the theme of Wade Wilson's character in this arc quite a bit. Because Deadpool really has no agency after a certain point. Because his memory has been messed with consistently with Weapon X program to the point where I mentioned how he slept with a lady in a flashback series. He forgets that happened, and he forgets that he had a daughter because of it. So that's the point where his agency and his ability to function and actually remember his past is affected. He forgets that he has a daughter. And one of the huge issues of this is he's trying to find them, and he doesn't know whether they're alive or dead, and he doesn't even know if they're real. So he eventually lets himself get kidnapped after trying to ask the other super soldiers for help, but he is also Deadpool, so he doesn't really have a good reputation, and that's very deservedly earned in universe. So the one thing I want to point out here is Deadpool doesn't have any agency over dying. He never has, even when the biggest show of this is probably when Thanos cursed him with immortality. Even when he wants to die, he can't. There's an entire series of comic books where Deadpool, I forget when this is actually published, but it was an earlier publication, where Deadpool is honestly trying to outwit his healing factor. And then he's cursed with immortality. So Deadpool can't die. He can never escape the fact that he is a constantly degrading and regenerating tumor that is in pain. So towards the end of the Good, the Bad, and the Ugly series, he finds out that the lady he slept with, her name is Carmilla? Something like that, I don't really remember, is dead. He doesn't know whether his daughter's dead or alive, but he's basically assuming he's dead. So he goes to confront Butler, who is the person that was kidnapping him and using him as an experiment. And he finds out that Butler wasn't kidnapping him and trying to use him to create super soldiers, which is what he was hired to do. He's trying to find how they cured his cancer, because Butler's sister is a terminal case of cancer.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's sad.
So, yeah. Which, unfortunately, comic books can, turn around real quick. And so the thing is when Deadpool is talking to him, there's a series. And there's a series of panels. And it's Butler trying to convince Deadpool what's happening, and then telling him not to look at her sister. And during this entire exchange, Deadpool is just looking at his sister, which he's keeping in essentially a sterile, white, completely sealed hospital room at the bottom of this facility. And I know that this isn't a visual form of media, but all of Deadpool's flashbacks to the Weapon X program are in the same style that Butler's room for his sister is in. So you're supposed to draw a visual parallel between the experiments that Butler ran on Deadpool and the weapon X factors and the experiments that he's drawing on his sister. So Deadpool continues talking with him, and he says some really peculiar things. And one of the things he says is death before experimentation. And Butler kind of answers, because he's in the bottom of Butler's facility, is like, well, you don't really have a choice. At this point, it's going to happen whether you're not. And Deadpool rejoins with the fact that he wasn't talking to Butler. At which point, the comic book quickly cuts to a pan of Butler's sister opening the door. Which is really interesting because it's established earlier in that Butler's sister is essentially cryogenically frozen except for treatments. She has no choice in this. She has no agency. So when she gets up and takes the agency from Butler, that is a direct parallel to Wade being unable to in the first couple panels of the issue. Now, this continues to the point where Deadpool asks her what she wants to do, and she says, "I'm going to stay here. Even if there's a large chance of mushroom clouds, this is where I stay." I also realize I am spamming the InkGuild project thing with pictures, but I feel like the visual medium here is very important. So this happens, and he agrees. Despite there's another person in his head. Keep in mind, the other person in his head is saying, no, we need her for evidence. No, you can pick her up and force her to do what you need to get done to get justice here. And Deadpool says no, which isn't actually generally in character for Deadpool because he's generally characterized as rather selfish and impulsive. But the agency to make your own decisions about your body and to stop experimentation is something that Deadpool, for all of his fart jokes, for all of his hilarity, for all of his slapstick humor, is always very solid on. This is something that is kept throughout most of the comics. Even the really early 2008 Cable and Deadpool series had a moment where Cable was being consumed by his techno-organic virus. And it was happening in front of Deadpool, and Deadpool was like, yeah, sure, whatever. Great, you can die and my job will be done. And then he kind of asked for an explanation of what's happening because this guy's being taken over by a metal parasite before him. And then after getting the explanation, Deadpool's only response is like, oh, it's like cancer. At which point then Deadpool starts turning into a bit of goo because comic books are really weird, and decides that his healing factor in cancer is strong enough to counteract through comic book magic the techno-organic virus. But this idea of sympathy for people in pain and sympathy for people that have something eating them alive on the inside literally is something that continues throughout the series. When I was discussing this earlier with Marie-Soleil, she brought up X-23, which is the little child cloned version of Wolverine, and how Deadpool feels really close to her in that continuation of the comic. And it's not because she's a little girl, it's not because she's cute, it's because when he meets her, she's like, let's go mess up this lab that experimented on me. And in a throw-off line, he's like, yes, let's go blow them up, let's go kill them all. But it's not necessarily because ha 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 Deadpool likes violence. It's because he has a serious chip on his shoulder and a very serious streak towards unwanted experimentation on people. And I feel like it isn't a facet of the character that gets really discussed or talked about, because so much of Deadpool is ha ha ha, I'm shooting hamsters out of a hamster gun that are rabid. That's an actual thing he did. And then you turn around and you have a weird little contemplation of autonomy and death, which he no longer has, and how he tries to give that to people who he thinks doesn't have it. So yeah, that's Deadpool. He's my favorite because he encompasses all of that.
Yeah. See, when you were initially about to talk about Deadpool panels, I was thinking Like the one that popped into my head was probably one that had like made its rounds around the internet, and that is of a girl who is like standing on the edge of a building, and Deadpool of all people is the one who doesn't just talk her out of it, but brings her to the hospital.
Yeah, that was in this issue run.
Oh,
So.
all right. Well, yeah, that's wonderful. Like it's nice to think it's a nice like. I feel like change of pace is kind of a disservice to what is happening with Deadpool, but basically just like adding more depth to what many perceive as a very like, as a very comical, hilarious character. Like everyone kind of knows that like Deadpool has his shits and giggles and whatever, but really he is fucked up and he's been through like a lot of fucked up shit. And to see like such a prominent character not only deal with that but also like empathize with that with other characters is just, I think it's what makes like Deadpool so lovable, really. Like, I obviously can't speak for everybody's love for Deadpool, but like it's certainly what made me have an appreciation for the character, because it's like it's that kind of like, showing your audience that like, yeah, I'm aware of how bad your struggles are. Like, just look at how our one character is dealing with it. But if this character can make it through, despite all they've been through, then,
Yeah. The thing about Deadpool is he, above all other superhero, well, I can't say that because that is a very wide stance, but he is an example of a superhero that is allowed to be messed up.
Right.
Because I made this comparison earlier. Deadpool has like a multi-choice backstory where you can believe he's from Canada, you can believe he's from Ohio, you can believe that he was Special Forces and got dishonorable discharge. He has many stories behind him. And instead of what happens with some characters where they erased that story and wrote a new one, they just kept adding to the mythos with Deadpool. So like, unfortunately, that means that more messed up shenanigans gets added on top of more messed up shenanigans. But in the end, because they respected that and they started trying to play with it in the narrative, it created what I think is a stronger character.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if you want to discuss ideas of trauma and you want to discuss ideas of like body autonomy, obviously like Marvel isn't necessarily your first go-to topic. But it is one of the like wider breaching areas of media.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know, but when I think of Deadpool, before I started like doing a little bit of like why I love this character so much and started thinking about my ideas of it, it's like I didn't expect to be able to go this deep with Deadpool. I love Deadpool because he's fun to read and he's ridiculous. But then like it's nice because he's a character that you can dig a lot into.
Yeah. I think like as is with a lot of our characters, and I guess to kind of close off the discussion, like there's always reasons as to why we love the characters that we, not just talk about here on podcasts, but like just the ones that we watch and the ones that we read, and like we kind of tell our friends about it, or we just like they just sit in the back of our heads for so long that just makes them special. And it's fun breaking down what it is, whether it's their characterization, whether it's their interactions with other characters, whether it's to some degree, whether it's their trauma, whether it's just like smaller thing too, like whether it's what weapons they use, what's their physical appearance, like what's their superhero costume. Like there's so many things that makes characters iconic. And like I think doing 3 parts of this, or doing 3, or like having 3 dedicated episodes just talking about favorite characters still isn't enough. So maybe we'll do a 4th part, but I think if everyone's good with it, maybe we can start winding down and closing off for tonight.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Sorry, my last rant was wrong, but I had a lot of things to say.
Sorry, no, it's fine. Just
Good stuff.
yeah, it was good. Just, it is getting a bit late, so
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I guess, yeah, with all of that being said, let's close off for tonight. So, I think just to kind of thank everybody. Lee, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to the rest of the season ahead. But for everyone listening, thank you. We are the Ink Guild on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter. However, our main home is on YouTube and Spotify, but you can also connect with us individually if you'd like. Our individual links will be down in the description below. Check out our Wix if you want to learn more about us, and keep an eye out for more podcasts and other creative stuff on either of the social networks that we've provided so far. As a quick closing segment, let's just run through a quick list of honorable mentions. I really debated this earlier, but I easily could have talked about any character. Like, I think maybe the two main characters, or the biggest relationship in the Mitchells versus the Machines, and that is between Katie Mitchell and Bob Mitchell, I think. So the father and the daughter, they're wonderful characters. They have a wonderful relationship. Aside from that, I would have loved to talk about Mal from Shadow and Bone. Just noticing the contrast between him in the books and him in the show. We've touched on probably already, but just like, I'd like to weigh in on that a little bit more too. And yeah, I think that's it. I mean, like, oh wait, no. I also was going to, I was also contemplating talking about Atreus from God of War 2018, because I talked about his father in previous episodes, but I will save that for another day. Alex, how about you? Any quick honorable mentions?
I only prepared one, which is Victor Vale from V.E. Schwab's Villains series. I just think he's a really interesting character, and I like reading about him, and I want there to be a third book, damn it!
That's your call, V.E. Schwab. Do it for, if no one else, do it for Alex. All right, Gabe.
I don't really have any honorable mentions. Perhaps I did have a third character, perhaps, because that's what we did last time, but we didn't do it. It was going to be Celty from Durarara. I don't totally know how to pronounce it. That's how it looks.
I think you're good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You're fine. I think you're good. Yeah. Someone knows how to pronounce it, and that'll be their problem. Marie-Soleil, how about you?
Katza from the Graceling books. Any of the other characters from Tamora Pierce's books, or I kind of wanted to talk about Mal, as in Maleficent's daughter from the Descendants books, not the movies. The movies sucked, but the books are good.
That's good. Tyler?
Yeah. I was debating most characters from the Code Geass anime as my favorite anime title. There's a video game called Paradise Killer, which is a surrealist detective masterpiece. I was debating discussing some of the characters in there, but decided that would get unnecessarily complex just because of how the world building is in that. And then I was suggested to and quickly shot down, though gave it some more thought later, doing any character from My Little Pony, though decided against it.
Gotcha. All right, Lee?
My honorable mentions are William Lawrence from the Temrare series, which is a story about a naval captain who decides that maybe the British Empire isn't so good, also with dragons, and Hawkeye from Full Metal Alchemist.
Nice. All right, well, I guess we can probably put a tab on, like, just our honorable mentions, because not only can we talk about favorite characters, however, like throughout tonight, I was also wanting to potentially follow up on a least favorite character soon, but we don't know that yet. Our season is already planned out, so maybe it'll be a next season thing. Anyway, I guess that's just me looking ahead. So yeah, with everything kind of out of the way, then thanks everybody for listening in. Have a good night.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.